The sea was calm that night, a still black mirror swallowing the stars. Inside U-557, the air hung heavy with sweat and oil. Captain Lieutenant Eric Voss stood over the periscope, his breath fogging the eyepiece as he searched for movement in the Atlantic dark. A sudden echo pulsed through the sonar room, short, sharp, unnatural. Radio operator Carl Brenner froze, his trembling hand on the dial. Herr Captain, it's not a ship. It's something else. Before Voss could reply, the sonar screamed again, faster, closer. Panic spread through the steel coffin. The chief engineer, Otto Riedel, barked orders to dive deeper, metal groaning under pressure. No convoy, Voss muttered. No engines. So who's watching us? The silence returned. Only the thud of hearts and the creak of bolts holding the sea at bay. Then came a distant hum from above. A signal, faint yet deliberate. Voss felt it in his chest, more than his ears. For the first time, the hunter felt hunted. Somewhere in the vast dark, invisible eyes had found them, and he whispered into the stillness, "How can they see what has no light?" Hours later, the air inside the submarine grew heavier, each breath tasting of rust and despair. Voss studied the sonar logs, the same pulsing signature appearing again and again with surgical precision. "It finds us no matter how deep we dive," Franz said softly. The captain didn't reply. He knew. Something invisible marked them, tracking every turn. The crew whispered of a curse, of allied ghosts above the waves. Brenner couldn't sleep. He heard faint beeps in his dreams. Otto muttered, "Machines shouldn't know where men hide, and yet this one did." Voss stared at the dim clock, realizing that the ocean was no longer their shield. It was their cage. The next morning, they surfaced through fog. Voss ordered the conning tower hatch open, and the Atlantic's cold breath filled the sub. The sea was empty, utterly still. Yet Brenner's radar emitted a faint ticking, something circling, unseen. Through binoculars, Adler scanned the gray horizon. "Nothing," he said, but Voss felt watched. Above the clouds, a British patrol plane drifted, unseen but knowing. When the radar ticked again, closer this time, Voss whispered, "Dive." They descended like a ghost into the sea's mouth. In the dark below, the sound returned. A pulse. A heartbeat that wasn't theirs. Depth charges thundered in the distance. Each explosion shivered the hull, raining flakes of rust from the ceiling. "They can't know we're here," Adler shouted, clutching the wall as water sprayed from cracked valves. Voss gripped the periscope brace, refusing to flinch. Otto screamed over the roar, "Pressure rising!" Brenner pressed his hands over his ears, praying. For hours, they sat still, every sound magnified by fear. Then, silence. No ships, no signals, just the low hum of machines and the faint, persistent tick of something watching from above. The ocean felt alive, but not in mercy. When dawn came again, it felt unreal. A pale light through periscope glass, distant and unreachable. The crew was silent, hollow-eyed. Voss scribbled in his logbook, the words uneven. "We are being seen." Adler sat beside him, whispering that radar could never pierce the ocean. Voss looked up and simply said, "It already has." Outside, the endless gray swelled and sank like the breath of something alive. The hum of the unseen radar returned, faint and rhythmic, like a heartbeat counting down the end of the Wolfpack's reign. Night swelled over the Atlantic like ink poured across glass. Inside U-557, no one spoke. The engines hummed low, steady as a heartbeat forced to keep calm. Voss stood near the map table, eyes fixed on the plotted dots where 5 other U-boats had vanished. No survivors, no signals, just silence. Brenner's headphones crackled with faint static again, and he whispered, Herr Captain, I think it's them. The British? Voss asked. No, Brenner murmured. The ones who were lost. Adler shot him a look, half warning, half fear. Voss didn't scold him. He simply stared into the dark steel around them, wondering if ghosts could echo through frequencies, if the sea remembered the dead. The sonar pulsed once, faint, distant, like a dying heartbeat. Then again, closer. Otto muttered a curse under his breath, and for the first time even the captain couldn't hide his unease. The next day, the sea raged like a living thing. Waves slammed the hull, and the submarine groaned as if it might split apart. They were running blind, radar off, engines throttled low. They know where we are, Adler said, his voice nearly swallowed by the storm. How could they? Voss shot back. No aircraft could see through this, but Brenner's instruments beeped, faintly at first, then clearer. The same sound that haunted their dreams. Otto cursed and slammed a valve shut as water sprayed in. They can see us through the clouds now, Brenner whispered. Even through the ocean for the first time, Voss didn't deny it. He looked upward through the ceiling, through the black water, toward a sky he could no longer trust. By midnight, exhaustion had turned fear into numbness. The men sat in silence, their bodies swaying with the rhythm of the sea. The sonar beeped, once, twice, each echo marking a new approach. Surface, Adler asked. Voss shook his head. If they see us, we're dead. Brenner stared at the radar, whispering numbers to himself, trying to find logic in madness. Then came the sound, not sonar, not machinery, a soft hum above the ocean, growing louder, heavier. Adler's voice broke the silence. They're not searching. They're waiting. Voss said nothing. He simply reached for the periscope again, though there was nothing left to see but water and fear. The first explosion came without warning. A depth charge ripped the silence apart, the shockwave slamming through every rib of the submarine. Otto screamed that the starboard engine was hit. Adler pulled a sailor from the smoke, blood running down his arm. Brenner's radio sparked. The wires hissed like serpents. Voss ordered a dive, deeper into crushing pressure. Well, implode, Otto shouted, but Voss didn't stop. The metal screamed around them. Bolts popped like gunshots. Then, quiet. The lights dimmed, then went out completely. In the dark, someone whispered, "They can still see us." No one argued. When light finally returned, it was faint. The emergency lamps humming like dying stars. The crew barely moved, each breath shallow, each heartbeat counting borrowed time. "How deep are we?" Adler asked weakly. "Too deep," Otto murmured. Brenner's trembling hand reached for the radar switch, but Voss stopped him. "No signals," he said softly. "Not even ours." They sat in silence, staring into the dim red glow. Outside, the ocean groaned. The hunters were gone. For now. Yet, deep within the walls of steel, each man knew they were already marked. The Atlantic had learned their scent, and it would not forget. The morning broke gray and soundless. The ocean, once their ally, now stretched empty and cruel. U-557 floated half-dead on the surface, her hull scarred and bleeding rust. The engines coughed, refusing to start. Inside, Voss stared at the compass needle spinning aimlessly. "We've lost her," Otto whispered. "No," Voss said softly. "She's lost us." Adler climbed up to the conning tower, scanning the mist. Then, a faint hum. The sound grew, steady and deliberate. Brenner's voice cracked. Aircraft, closing fast. The crew scrambled, but it was too late. A shape cut through the fog above. A British patrol plane, wings gleaming like a blade of light. A single flare dropped, painting the water in orange fire. Voss looked up, blinking into the glow, and said quietly, "I found us." The aircraft circled like a vulture, its shadow passing over the wounded submarine. Then the loudspeaker crackled, "Surface crew surrender or be destroyed." Voss's men looked to him, waiting. His jaw tightened. For years he had been the hunter. Now he was prey. "We surface," he said, his voice hollow. "We end it on our feet." Otto muttered a curse. Brenner trembled, and Adler simply nodded. The crew emerged one by one, faces pale beneath gray helmets. Above them, the British pilot dipped his wings in signal. The war had changed. It wasn't bravery that won anymore, but invention. Hours later, the captured crew sat aboard a British destroyer. Everything was too bright, too clean. Voss stared at the polished metal floors, hearing the hum of machines that worked without fear. Across from him stood Captain Thomas Blake, calm and almost kind. "You led U-557?" Blake asked. Voss nodded. "You've caused us trouble." "Not enough," Voss replied. Blake smiled faintly. "No one can hide anymore, Captain. Not under the sea. Not anywhere." Voss met his gaze, searching for cruelty and finding none. Just certainty. That frightened him more than hate. In the interrogation room, a radar screen hummed behind Captain Blake. Voss' eyes were drawn to it, to the soft sweep of the rotating line. Green, gentle, merciless. Blake turned the dial, and dots began to appear across the screen. "Each one is a ship," he said. "Yours, ours, doesn't matter." "We see them all," Adler whispered. "How?" Blake simply smiled. "Electric eyes, Captain. They see without light." Voss leaned forward, his voice barely a breath. "So that's it," he said. "That's how we died." Blake nodded, not cruelly, but as if sharing a simple truth. Later that night, Voss stood alone in his cell. Outside, the hum of engines and distant radio chatter filled the corridors. He closed his eyes, seeing again the radar's sweeping light. The ghosts of the men he'd lost seemed to move with it, circling endlessly. Adler appeared at the door, flanked by a guard. "I've asked for cooperation," he said quietly. Voss didn't turn. "Tell them to keep their machines," he whispered. "The ocean belongs to no one." Yet deep inside, he knew the ocean was already conquered, not by men, but by the invisible hum of progress. The next morning, Voss and Adler were escorted through narrow corridors that smelled of metal and ozone. The hum of machinery filled the air, steady, precise, without emotion. Captain Blake led them into a large chamber filled with screens and spinning dishes. "Welcome to Bawdsey," he said, gesturing to the rows of operators hunched over glowing scopes. Voss's eyes locked on the green sweep of a radar monitor. Each rotation revealed tiny specks moving slowly across the map. Ships, aircraft, submarines, all exposed. Blake spoke calmly. "Every wave, every echo tells us where you hide. The sea doesn't protect anyone now." Voss felt his chest tighten. It wasn't the power of the machine that terrified him. It was how quiet it was. Blake turned a dial, and one of the radar screens zoomed closer. "There," he said softly. "Your boats." Tiny specks appeared, moving slowly, deliberately, before one vanished into static. "That one's gone," Blake added without emotion. Voss swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the blinking lights. "You don't even see them," he said quietly. "You see only ghosts." Blake tilted his head. "Ghosts are enough." Adler stepped forward, anger rising in his voice. "You're not fighting us anymore." "You're fighting the ocean itself." Blake didn't answer. The room's hum filled the silence like a heartbeat made of wires. Later, they were taken outside to the radar field, a stretch of coastline bristling with tall antenna towers reaching toward the gray sky. The sea crashed nearby, endless and indifferent. Blake lit a cigarette, smoke curling in the cold wind. "These eyes don't blink," he he said. Even when you sleep, they're watching. Voss watched the rotating dishes sweep the horizon and thought of all the sailors who never saw death coming. War used to be courage against courage, he murmured. Now it's man against machine. Blake's gaze softened. Machines just make courage irrelevant. The wind howled through the metal towers like ghosts learning to breathe. Inside again, the hum of electricity surrounded them like a living pulse. Blake motioned for one of the operators to activate a simulation. The radar screen lit up, a pattern of dots forming a convoy, then a smaller echo moving beneath them. "That's you," Blake said quietly. And that's what happens next. A button pressed, and the smaller dot blinked out. Voss stared at the screen, unable to speak. Adler's jaw trembled as he whispered, "So simple." Blake looked between them. War is mathematics now. For the first time, Voss felt truly old. Not in years, in purpose. When the demonstration ended, Blake dismissed the operators. The room fell silent except for the hum of power. "Now you understand," Blake said softly. "You can't hide from what you can't see." Voss turned toward the window, looking at the vast Atlantic beyond. "We thought the ocean was ours," he whispered, "but it was never ours. It only tolerated us." Adler stood behind him, eyes hollow, voice quiet. "And now it's telling us to leave." Voss nodded slowly, the weight of it settling deep. For the first time since the war began, he felt something close to surrender. Not to men, but to the truth. The air in the interrogation room was still, heavy with cigarette smoke and quiet calculation. Voss sat at a steel table, his wrists free now, but his will not. Across from him, Blake leafed through reports, convoy logs, sonar data, the last transmissions from German U-boats. "You lost 50 men," Blake said softly. "And for what?" Voss didn't answer. "They died believing they were invisible," Blake continued. "But the ocean tells us everything now." Voss looked up, eyes hollow. "Then why do you still kill?" Blake paused, cigarette burning low. "Because your leaders refuse to listen." The words hung in the air, sharp and merciless. For the first time, Voss realized the war had already ended. They were just pretending it hadn't. Later, the door opened and Adler was brought in, escorted by guards. His face looked older, not in years, but in weight. He sat beside Voss, glancing at the floor. Blake placed 2 cups of tea before them. "You've both seen what we have," he said. "You can end this. Help us stop the killing." Adler looked up first. "You're asking us to betray our own. I'm asking you to save them," Blake replied. Voss said nothing. The silence stretched like a wire between them. Finally, Adler whispered, "If we speak, we die as traitors. If we don't, we die anyway." Voss's eyes met his, and in that shared look was the realization that war had stolen choice long ago. Blake leaned closer, voice low. "Do you know what your command calls you now? Lost. Not dead. Lost." He slid a paper forward. Intercepted German U-557 was presumed destroyed. Adler exhaled, trembling. "So it's over," he murmured. "You no longer exist," Blake said. "You can decide what kind of ghosts you'll be." Voss stared at the message, the words blurring. "We gave everything to the sea," he said quietly, "and it gave us back nothing." Blake nodded slowly. "That's what it does." The hum of the radar from the hall outside filled the silence again. Steady. Endless. Unfeeling. That night, Voss and Adler shared a cell again. Rain drummed against the narrow window, the rhythm matching their breathing. "What if we tell them?" Adler whispered. "What if we end it?" Voss shook his head. "And what?" "The sea doesn't care who wins." Adler turned toward him, voice cracking. "But we can save lives." Voss closed his eyes. "No. We'd only help them kill faster. The rain grew louder, drowning the words. Both men fell silent, listening to the storm, the one outside and the one within. Neither noticed when dawn began to creep across the horizon, pale and indifferent. In the morning, Blake returned, his tone quieter than before. "There's one last thing you should see." He led them to the deck of the destroyer. The sun rose slowly over the Atlantic, turning the waves gold. On the horizon, small dots moved. British escorts shepherding merchant ships safely through the channel. Voss squinted against the light. "Radar again?" he asked. Blake nodded. "And men who trust it?" Voss looked at him for a long time, then turned to the sea. "You've won," he said. Blake's answer was quiet. "No one wins. We just learn faster." Voss didn't respond. The horizon glowed with new light. But to him, it looked like the end of the world. Days passed. The war continued beyond the gray horizon, but in the quiet corridors of the British base, time moved slower. Voss was given a desk, paper, and a choice to write down everything he knew about German operations. The room smelled of ink and seawater. He sat there, pen in hand, staring at the blank sheet. "You could save lives," Blake had said. The words replayed like a ghost in his mind. Adler stood in the doorway, pale and silent. "If you don't," he whispered, "they'll find someone who will." Voss looked up at him, eyes hollow. "Then let them," he said softly. "Let them learn without me." Yet, as he stared at the page again, the faces of his dead crew rose before him. Boys who had trusted him to bring them home. His hand trembled. That night Voss couldn't sleep. He paced his cell, the sound of his boots echoing against the steel floor. Outside, thunder rolled over the sea. When Adler entered quietly, carrying a folded paper, Voss stopped. "They asked again," Adler said. "This time they want details on U-boat routes." Voss stared at him, unreadable. "And if we refuse, they'll move us to the camp," Adler replied, voice trembling. "You know what that means." Silence stretched between them. Then Voss said, "You think they'll spare anyone if we speak?" Adler's eyes glistened. "Maybe they'll spare themselves." Voss turned away, jaw tight. "Then they'll never forgive us." The next morning, Blake visited again, coat wet from the rain. "You haven't written a word," he said quietly. Voss looked up. "You don't need me. You already see everything." Blake exhaled smoke, watching him. "Machines can see movement," he said. "But they can't see men. Not what drives them." Voss frowned. "And what drives you?" Blake smiled faintly. "The end of this." He stepped closer. "You can help make that happen. You can stop another convoy from sinking. Isn't that worth more than silence?" Voss stared at him, the hum of the base surrounding them. "Silence," he said, "is the only thing the sea ever taught me." That evening, Adler returned to the interrogation room alone. Blake had left documents on the table, maps, codes, frequencies. He stared at them, hands shaking. He thought of his friends on the sea, of the bodies that never surfaced. Then he thought of those still alive, sailing blind into the storm. He picked up a pencil. When Voss entered moments later, he froze. "Don't," Voss said quietly. Adler's hand trembled. "We can't win, Eric. We can only stop losing." Voss walked forward slowly. "At what cost?" Adler looked up, tears in his eyes. "At least this time someone will live." The pencil dropped. The silence that followed felt heavier than guilt. When morning came, Voss found Adler gone. Guards said he'd been moved to another base. No explanation. Blake didn't meet his eyes that day. Alone again, Voss walked to the observation deck overlooking the gray Atlantic. The sea looked endless, unbroken, just as it always had. Yet it no longer felt free. He leaned on the railing, wind cutting against his face. "You see everything now?" he whispered, staring into the waves. But you'll never understand us. Somewhere beneath that water lay the wrecks of 100 U-boats, graves that no machine could truly find. Voss closed his eyes and let the cold air wash over him. The hunter was gone. All that remained was a man learning how to be small again. Years passed. The war ended, and the world learned to breathe again. Or at least pretend to. Eric Voss lived quietly in Hamburg, repairing fishing boats along the docks. The sea was still there, vast and calm, pretending nothing had happened. One morning, an envelope arrived with no return mark. Inside was a single photograph, a memorial stone by the coast of Brittany, carved with the names of lost U-boat crews, his among them. He stared at it for a long time, then folded it carefully into his coat. The same day, he boarded a train toward the sea. He didn't tell anyone why. Some journeys aren't about return. They're about permission to remember. The train rolled through mist and silence. Voss watched the countryside drift past, green fields, broken towns, faces that didn't look back. Every sound, every vibration of the rails reminded him of the hum of engines under the sea. When he finally reached the coast, the air smelled of salt and old metal. He walked alone toward the memorial, its gray stone glistening with rain, dozens of names carved deep. Young men, their courage swallowed by the Atlantic. His fingers traced each line until he found his own. Captain Lieutenant Eric Voss, missing 1943. He smiled faintly. Not missing, he whispered. At the memorial, Voss met a British officer. Older, cane in hand, uniform worn with time. Thomas Blake. His hair was silver now, but his eyes still held the same calm steel. They stood in silence for a while, the wind tugging at their coats. "You lived," Blake said finally. "For a while," Voss replied. Blake nodded. "I sometimes wish I hadn't seen it all." Voss looked out at the sea. "Machines don't forgive," he said. "But men can." Blake smiled softly. "Then let's start there." The two men stood side by side, strangers bound by memory, watching the same horizon that had once divided them. They spoke little after that. Blake left flowers at the base of the stone and walked away without looking back. Voss stayed until the light faded, the sound of the waves rising like old voices beneath him. Kneeling, he whispered the names of his men: Brenner, Adler, Riedel, letting each syllable dissolve into the wind. "You were seen," he said softly, "but not forgotten." The tide crept closer, licking at the rocks, and for a moment he imagined the distant hum of sonar again, calling him home. But the sound faded into nothing. Only the sea remained, vast and unconcerned. Night fell slowly. The sea turned black, the horizon melting into darkness. Voss remained by the edge, coat whipping in the wind. "They see everything now," he murmured. "But they still don't see this." He pressed the photograph, the one from the envelope, into the stone cracks and stepped back. The tide surged higher, washing over his boots. For a long moment, he simply watched the water move, endless, patient, alive. Then he whispered, "For every man who thought he couldn't be seen." The wind swallowed his words, carrying them out to sea, where somewhere deep below, the ghosts of U-557 listened in silence.